The Generations is very much about honouring the whiskey, doing right by the whiskey. And in this case, it's about 80 years of celebration, about this incredible spirit being cradled in this incredible oak cask. Every cask has a destiny, and this cask's destiny was always something special. I've been a long-time admirer of Sir David Adjaye's work, and he's got an incredible skill at being able to use wonderful raw materials, very much put his personal signature through his designs that really stand out today.
When collaborating, I'm looking for like-minded partners in terms of their craft or their beliefs or their traditions. But I loved Gordon MacPhail's kind of rigor and obsession with their product and their craft. And that for me felt like a kind of wonderful partner.
John Urquhart and George, they would have been laying down the whiskies in cask with the full knowledge that they would not be around to see them bottled. And it's the passing down of this incredible skills over 4 generations, over 125 years, that really is a gift to Gordon MacPhail, is a gift to the people who work there.
Legacies are one of those important words for artists and architects because we're interested in the effects of what we do. The effects as in the kind of way in which what we produce changes people's lives. And one wanting the legacy that one has to be about making a positive contribution.
Never before has anybody aged whiskey for 8 decades. 80 years. Surely for something that has taken this long, with this level of skill and patience to evolve and develop, needs to be celebrated in the right way.
各位线上的媒体朋友，大家晚安，好久不见了我是今天活动的主持人 Joe，欢迎大家今天一起参与本次 Gordon MacPhail 高登麦克菲尔世代系列格兰利威酒厂80年苏格兰单一麦芽威士忌全球同步线上的一个记者会。我们知道高登麦克菲尔这个世代系列，它其实代表了4代家族以及创办人的一个品牌对于品牌的一个坚持，而且也显示出他们的缓慢熟成的一个精湛的一个技术。这个系列的一个很大的一个精神，也是持续推出史上最悠久的苏格兰单一麦芽威士忌，给全世界喜欢单一麦芽威士忌的爱好者。在今年的9月 ，Gordon MacPhail 高登麦克菲尔也与阿加野爵士 Sir David Adjaye 携手打造，联手推出了一个全世界最古老的苏格兰单一麦芽威士忌。这个单一麦芽威士忌是格兰利威80年苏格兰单一麦芽威士忌，也是高登麦克菲尔世代系列的最新作品。台湾总代理廷汉企业股份有限公司也将这款非常珍惜的威士忌引进台湾，让今天在线上的媒体朋友们，以及台湾爱好威士忌的消费者以及藏家，都能见证到而且可以去买到这一款非常珍惜的酒款。同时呢，我们也知道这个酒的这个系列的一些故事，还有这个酒的故事，我也跟大家稍微分享一下。在1940年的2月3号，被誉为单一麦芽威士忌之父的乔治·厄克特以及他的父亲约翰，把格兰利威酒厂出来的烈酒装入了高登麦克菲尔特制打造的一个橡木桶。他认为说，橡木桶的熟成是需要时间去见证的， 而且等到品质是对的时候，才可以把这款酒献与人，跟大家来做一个分享。所以这个桶号340号橡木桶的格兰利威酒厂的这个橡木桶的里面的酒呢，当初是依据为要熟成80年才可以跟大家来做一个见面。当然呢，在于2022年的2月5号，也就凭着累积超过1世纪125年的独特技术以及经验，这瓶酒终于诞生了。全球总共有250瓶，相当的珍贵。为了赞扬约翰以及乔治的一个远见，高登麦克菲尔这次也跟享誉全球的建筑师以及设计师阿加野爵士一同合作，设计出了一个独一无二的一个酒瓶，还有外装木盒，来存放这一个非常珍贵的威士忌。阿加野爵士他是被誉为具备艺术家的敏锐度与眼光的建筑师，自然成为创作合作伙伴的一个首选。他也表示，用超过80年的时间熟成单一麦芽威士忌本身就是一个艺术，所以对于艺术传承跟工艺的一种价值观，高登麦克菲尔跟阿扎野爵士是非常契合的。今天我们很荣幸的能见证到高登麦克菲尔世代系列格兰利威酒厂80年的苏格兰单一麦芽威士忌的设计以及它的风味，来品茗这个品质卓越、珍稀以及独特的单一麦芽苏格兰威士忌。在这个之前呢，我要先介绍几位在现场的一些嘉宾，还有长官们来跟大家来做一个致辞。首先呢，我们先有请廷汉企业股份有限公司的大家长、董事长 Mike Cunningham 柯廷汉董事长上台为我们致辞。Mike。
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for that introduction. Distinguished guests, friends, and colleagues, I am delighted to welcome you today to Cottingham Limited to participate in a quite remarkable event, a unique occasion, unprecedented in the long history of Scotland's gift to the world, Scotch whisky.
各位媒体朋友晚安。当然今天呢，我要欢迎大家一起参与今天晚上这一个活动。这个活动在威士忌业界来讲，算是一个非常独一无二的一个活动。
Gordon and MacPhail, Scotland's leading maturation experts with a history of more than 125 years dedicated to the art of maturing single malt whisky, are releasing today in London a wonderful new addition to their generations range of whiskies.
高登麦克菲尔有125年的历史，今天呢，在伦敦，它即将上市一个年份最久的苏格兰单一麦芽威士忌，将这款酒献示给全世界的人。
Cottingham Limited, who are the exclusive importers of Gordon and MacPhail products into Taiwan, are honoured and proud to introduce this outstanding whiskey to the Taiwan market. Our company has a history of almost 30 years in Taiwan and has participated in the emergence of single malt Scotch whisky in the Taiwan market. Taiwan is one of the leading Scotch whisky markets in the world. It is therefore fitting that Taiwan is able to participate in the occasion of this unusual and outstanding launch of the oldest Scotch whisky ever offered to the world.
廷汉企业股份有限公司是高登麦克菲尔在台湾独家代理的伙伴。那当然，这次很荣幸的，也能再把这个世代系列的，也是到目前为止年份最高的苏格兰单一麦芽威士忌引进到台湾。其实廷汉企业在台湾已经有大约30年的历史了，然后在这30年的历史当中呢，也见证了台湾这个市场对于威士忌的喜好的这个市场的快速成长。然后我们也知道，今天透过跟英国连线的这个活动，我们很荣幸的能把这一款很珍稀的酒款带给台湾这个市场。
I invite everyone to enjoy this occasion. I am very confident you will be as impressed as I am. Thank you all for your support.
我希望接下来的活动，大家可以就是来跟我们共享这一款酒的上市。那我相信你也会对这款酒非常爱好的，所以呢，我就等一下就是邀请大家一起来跟我品茗这一款珍稀的酒款。再次谢谢大家今天来加入我们这一个活动，谢谢。Thank you, Mike.
Joe.
接下来呢，我要介绍另外一位大家长，他是庭岸企业股份有限公司的执行长 Stephen Parker， 裴世成裴执行长上台为我们致辞。Stephen，
Hey Joe, thank you very much. 谢谢。今天 Joe 是最辛苦的，我就是真的感谢你今天来翻译的。为了让 Joe 可以休息一下，我尽量用中文来支持一下。那大家应该知道，我中文不是我的母语，但是我尽量，所以如果我讲错的话，麻烦你原谅我，好不好？那今天其实3个月前，因为我在挺汉只有3个月，3个月前 Mike 叫我进去他的办公室，那他跟我讲，我第一份工作就是要帮他推出这个系列，那个世代系列这个项目。那时候我在这个过程中，我有感受到大概3种骄傲跟开心。第一个的骄傲，就是因为我觉得台湾人真的对 whisky 这个市场他的非常非常了解。因为待会我们另外一个朋友 Richard 他会跟你分享一下，这个 whisky 市场在台湾多大。但是我真的了解台湾人不是买很多 whisky 而已，他们真的很了解 whisky。像这个高年份的这种 whisky 的话，在台湾的接受度非常非常的高，所以我有得到这种骄傲，对我们台湾人这个骄傲。第二个是针对这个世代系列 generations， 因为现在我们这是推出来，这是第4代，真的是第4代。那这个是从大概2008年就开始了，就是每一次的话，基本上几乎都是世界上最高年份的 whisky 都出来了。那我们今天我们要跟大家分享一下这个80年这么高的一个年份的 whisky， 真的很特别。这个世代这个系列代表几个东西了，一个是 whisky 的特色，另外一个是我就是有这种家庭的感觉，因为世代这个就是 Gordon MacPhail 的家庭自己会推出来的，每一个 generation 他们都会自己选出来一个 generation 的 whisky。那第3个骄傲是因为我也知道要跟大家分享一下，在1个月后，这个 whisky 会被拍卖。那这个拍卖的所得奖会捐到苏格兰的一个慈善的机构。那这是因为在苏格兰那边有一个区域叫 Caledonia， 他们发现很多年前，他们发现这个森林那边快没有了。那这个慈善的机构，它是会用这个钱来布上重种很多树。那到目前的为止，他们已经有做到大概200万棵树，那要继续努力了。所以我做这个 program 不只有 whisky， 有这个慈善的一部分，还有我就是针对台湾真的了解 whisky 的这个骄傲，我真的得到一种就是很荣幸的感觉。那我只要谢谢大家今天的来自，谢谢 Joe，
谢谢 Stephen。那 Stephen， 其实下次我讲英文，你帮我翻译好了，因为你的中文好像比我还要好。好，那接下来我们现场还有另外一位来宾，他就是英侨商务协会执行长 Richard Stokes Green 来上台为我们致辞。Richard。
Good evening, Joe. A very good afternoon to you all, and thank you for inviting me to this auspicious event.
谢谢。第一个，首先跟大家致意一下，大家晚安。然后今天能参加这个活动，我非常的荣幸。
I'd like to thank Stephen Parker from Cottingham Limited for extending the invitation, which I all too readily accepted. After all, it's not every day that a distiller releases a Scotch of such distinction and heritage.
首先，我先感谢一下庭汉企业的裴执行长，因为当他邀请我来参加这个活动的时候，我马上就答应了，因为不是每一天都有机会来参加一个这么有意义的一个威士忌上市的一个记者会。
I would just like to say a very few words about the importance of the UK-Taiwan trade relationship, to highlight the great importance and value that we at the British Chamber of Commerce place on that relationship.
我要稍微就是花一点时间来讲一下有关于就是英国跟台湾的一个贸易中间的一些关系，而且在于这个英侨商务协会所代表的一个角色。
In 2019, around 5,500 UK businesses exported goods to Taiwan, worth around £1.5 billion in exports. And in the 4 quarters to the end of Q1 2021, Taiwan was the UK's 28th largest goods trading partner.
2019年来讲的话，有5400家在英国注册的企业有把他们的商品来出口来到台湾，然后来讲的话，应该是说差不多有15亿英镑的一些物品，然后在在12个月之内，也就是从2020年的第2季到2021年的第1季来讲的话，台湾是英国第28大的一个出口的一个伙伴。
According to the latest available figures, in the 12 months to June 2021, UK exports of goods to Taiwan increased by 3.8% compared to the same period in the previous year, which, under the prevailing global circumstances, demonstrates enormous resilience and robustness in our trading relationship.
去年7月到今年6月来讲的话，这个经济的成长又成长了3.8%，跟前年来比的话是3.8%的成长。对于现在全球的环境来讲，台湾跟英国的这样的一个贸易的一个状况是非常非常好的。
The top goods exports from the UK to Taiwan in the 4 quarters to the end of Q1 2021 were beverages, representing well over £210 million, or almost 16% of all UK goods exported to Taiwan. And a very significant proportion of that, of those goods in that category were Scotch whiskies.
刚刚讲到那段时间之内来讲的话，其实有2.1亿是有关于饮料进口到台湾。那在2.1亿里面，又是16%，其实是跟酒有关系的。然后这样来讲的话，其实你也知道威士忌为什么对台湾非常重要了。
So whiskey exports to Taiwan, and indeed Taiwan's appreciation of aqua vitae, remain incredibly strong. In 2019, Taiwan ranked 6th as an export market for the UK by value, and 17th largest in terms of volume, which is pretty impressive considering the island's population is around 24 million.
所以威士忌对台湾来讲，所谓的生命之水是非常重要的。那我们也能看到说，在2019年来讲的话，台湾假如说以金额来讲的话，是第6个苏格兰出口的最大市场，然后要是以那个量来讲的话，是第17个最大的市场。对于一个超2300多万的一个国家来讲的话，这是一个非常好的一个数字。
We greatly value the Taiwanese sophisticated taste and appreciation of quality Scotch, and UK distillers look forward to continuing to develop exceptional malts with distinctive flavors to satisfy the palate of the discerning Taiwanese consumer.
所以我们觉得台湾人的应该说我们的这种对威士忌的爱好来讲的话，英国这边是非常重视的，也希望在未来的话能把更好的一些威士忌推广到台湾这边来。
We wish you the very best of success with today's launch and a safe and prosperous remainder of 2021.
祝今天上市能一切顺利，也希望大家在2021年的时候能身体安康。谢谢大家。
Thank you, Joe.
下一位我们要介绍的是廷汉企业股份有限公司的行销总监 Matty 黄 ，Matty 为我们支持 Matty。Hello，
各位嘉宾、媒体朋友们，大家晚安，大家好，好久不见。我和大家一样，很期待今天晚上哦，跟着英国，跟着全球同步看着这个全球最古老的威士忌，也是第1桶的雪莉桶，而且是单桶的单一麦芽威士忌。容许我在这个 event 开始之前哦，我来跟大家快速的了解一下 Gordon MacPhail。Gordon MacPhail 刚刚提到是125年的历史，而且呢，他被 Charlie McLean 称为单一麦芽威士忌之父。那我们呢，今天晚上可以期待这个Gordon MacPhail 怎么样掌握这个橡木桶的专业，让这一支酒如何的漂亮的展现。我也很期待我今天晚上可以喝到。谢谢大家。
谢谢 Matty。那我们英国那边的线上直播已经快要开始了。不过在那个之前呢，我还是可以跟各位媒体这边稍微再分享一下。我们有2个所谓的 YouTube 的一个连结，一个的话是会全程以英国那边的原文转播，另外一个是中文这边会做一个翻译的直播。所以这个的话，你们可以在用这个方式来选择你想要等一下一起品茗或者一起看线上直播的一个那个选择方式。 那我们这边来讲的话，英国那边来讲的话，他们差不多在1分30秒的时候就会直接上线了。那我们也知道，等一下会有一个品茗的桥段。那在这1-2天的时候，我们也把一些英国寄过来的、空运过来非常珍贵的一个 tasting kit。都给各位媒体朋友们，那可以在这段时间，因为等一下国外的一个program， 应该说他们的这个流程非常紧凑，所以你们现在可以先把那个 tasting kit 先准备好，放在你们前面。那等到国外进入那个品茗桥段的时候，大家就可以一起来跟国外的嘉宾，还有国外那边的一些贵宾们来做一个品茗的一起品茗。那同时呢，我们在台湾这边的话，也会2位长官这边的话，我会陪同各位媒体朋友一起来做这个品茗的一个桥段。同时我们也知道 Golden MacPhail 这次这个世代系列来讲的话，有80年份的这个酒上市，其实也算是一个很独特的一个创举。所以说在这方面来讲的话，我们也觉得说这次虽然说是有疫情的关系，可是台湾是一个非常重要的一个市场，所以英国那边也邀请我们台湾说必定要邀请到这些媒体朋友们跟我们一起线上来做一个品茗，所以也是花了很多时间把这些 tasting kit 寄到台湾来，然后在台湾这边的话，我们也是同时利用今天晚上，虽然说是在晚上6点多钟，可是在英国那边来讲的话，是跟我们有点时差，所以他们是在中午，也快要到中午的时候在办这个活动。那等一下的话，也会看到这次跟 Golden MacPhail 联名的这个阿扎野爵士，也会在线上跟大家分享他的一些创意理念。好，我们现在就把时间基本上就要转播到英国那边去了，谢谢大家。
Welcome, wherever you are in the world, to the global launch of something that we've been waiting 80 years for, the Gordon & MacPhail Generations 80-year-old malt whisky, the oldest malt whisky in the world from the Glenlivet Distillery. There's many things that bring this extraordinary moment into focus, but the essence, I think, is collaboration. Gordon & MacPhail are a collaborative organisation. David Adjaye, more of whom in a minute, described them just a few minutes ago to me as probably the backbone of the whisky industry. They collaborate with other distilleries, but they also collaborate with craftsmen and, in this case, a world-renowned architect. And that idea, I think, makes that what we're about to taste and see more than just whiskey, but actually whiskey itself is this amazing coming together. Liquid history, I think, is how we're going to talk about it. It's taken a lot of time and patience. And the collaborators are all joining me on stage. I'm Tim Marlow, Director of the Design Museum here in London. We're at Sotheby's here in London, but this is very much a global event. And joining me is Ewan McIntosh, who is the Managing Director of the whisky institution that is Gordon MacPhail. Stephen Rankin is the part of the fourth generation of the family that set it up and has a world-renowned whisky palate. He's Director of Prestige. Johnny Fowle is, I call him a spiritualist, but his title is Director of Spirits at Sotheby's here in London. And David Adjaye, Sir David Adjaye, a world-class architect with offices in 3 continents and buildings to date in 5. Ewan, let's kick things off by framing, I suppose, the past in order to establish the future-facing vision of Gordon & MacPhail.
Thanks very much, Tim. Firstly, it's with great pleasure to welcome you here to share the story of this landmark 80-year-old whisky. For over 125 years and through 4 generations, Gordon MacPhail has been building relationship with distillery owners, filling their whiskies into our casks, and really seeking to release the finest quality single malts. The skill of matching spirit to wood has been passed down from generation to generation. That skill of knowing when our whiskey's reached its peak, that skill of knowing when actually it can last a little bit longer. We can keep it going a little bit longer in that cask. And that has meant that we have a range of whiskies which are unparalleled in the world, be that from distilleries which are no longer in production, they've closed and we still have stocks, to whiskies which have great age. And in many cases, the whiskies we release are the oldest ever expression from those distilleries. And today, we have the oldest ever. I've always had the belief that a whiskey business owned by a family is a perfect match. Our product, by its nature, is generational. There is no shortcuts to creating an aged whiskey. You have to wait for that to happen. The long-term nature is part of our philosophy. Being family-owned gives us that ability to just take that longer-term view. But it also gives us that sense of custodianship, that as we take this whiskey out of the warehouse, we have to replace it for something else, for other generations in the future. So it brings in that longevity as well. So what about the world's oldest single malt? In 1940, a world war was raging in Europe, and distilleries in Scotland were allowed to use a small amount of barley to produce whiskey. Glenlivet Distillery was one of those. And on the 3rd of February in that year, John Urquhart, the first generation of the Urquhart family, who still own the business today, along with his son George, filled a number of sherry casks at the distillery, as they had done in previous years. This was nothing new. This was part of the philosophy of the business. Now, Mr. George I was very fortunate to work with 3 generations of the family. I was very lucky to work with Mr. George. He was known as the father of single malts because of his foresight. And he understood that you could keep whiskey for longer periods than was seen as the norm at the time. And he understood that could develop extra qualities and give whiskey such a depth of character. So this cask, number 340, filled in 1940, was watched over by George for over 50 years. He would have looked after it, he would have monitored it, he would have sampled it, see how the whiskey was maturing, but he didn't bottle it. He handed it on to the 3rd generation of the business, who did exactly the same. They looked after it, they sampled it, they looked at it and said, this could go a little bit longer. Till it came to the 5th of February, 2020, and the 4th generation said, now's the time to bottle it. So this really is a legacy that's transcended 4 generations. And I'd like to show you a short film to really show the depth of this liquid history.
This whiskey was laid down in 1940. Now, due to the war, there was very limited amounts of raw materials. In fact, while the industry at large suffered probably about 1/3 of its production, Glenlivet Distillery lost 2/3 of its production that year, which makes this even rarer. The cask itself came to us as a result of a wonderful relationship with Alexander Williams of Williams & Humbert. This cask was to travel all the way from Spain, full of mature sherry. And on the sherry being bottled, Mr. George had a particular thing in mind with this cask, and that was to send it up to Glenlivet Distillery, where he matched it with the spirit from that wonderful distillery in the heart of Speyside in the Highlands of Scotland. But this wasn't by chance. George and his father John had been maturing whiskies now since 1895, and it was this incredible skill and knowledge and understanding of the reaction between the oak and the spirit that was to lead George to decide that this cask was going to that particular distillery.
The Generations Project's really important to Gordon MacPhail because it is the pinnacle of what we do. It is the culmination of 8 decades of maturation. So it's a real symbol of what Gordon MacPhail stands for. We're happy to wait till the time is right, be that 10 years or actually in this case 80 years. It's often quoted that the maturation of whiskey for great aging is more of an art than a science. And it was really this artistry that we wanted to celebrate when we were looking to commission our creative partner. I've said to a few people in the room today that I think at times as a whiskey producer we become slightly blasé about the product we have. We don't realise how special it is. But with this project, we really did want to recognise that artistry, the legacy and the craftsmanship of this 8-year-old special product. And we needed to wrap it in something really special. So we approached and we were delighted that internationally acclaimed architect Sir David Adjaye was able to join us in this project. I think we shared a vision and a belief on this investing for the future, leaving legacies, and creating something which was really exceptional. And I think we are so great that partnership has brought this product to fruition. It is something really, really special. David, thank you so much for helping us in this journey.
David, it sounds like a dumb question to ask you, because if anyone as illustrious as Gordon MacPhail asked me to get involved, I'd jump at it. But you are a very busy man. You have commissions for buildings and projects and urban replanning and rethinking the world. Numerous projects at any one moment. So we've heard from Ewan about why this would be something that they'd want to approach you about. But what was it that attracted to you about this in the priorities of everything that you're doing?
Thank you. It really was not very hard. Gordon MacPhail are sort of legendary, and their meticulous attention to their craft just for me was just so compelling. I'm working on buildings mostly, but every so often there's a moment to work on something at a different scale where the synergies align. And I'm not a wine person, but I love whiskey. So it really, it's my little vice. So it sort of touched my Achilles heel. I just was so excited to do it, more excited than they realized. I was very poker-faced about
it. As you say, you work on different kinds of projects and different kinds of scales, but actually to design, well, I was going to say a bottle, but it's more than that actually. It's a decanter and it's a casing.
Yeah.
That requires a certain sort of scaling down, but of course architecture often starts as an acorn or starts small scale. How was the process of working on this? How did that differ, and what similarities are there with a lot of the work that you do?
So for me, I mean, what was really special about this process, and also just looking at the history of bottles and decanters, was that it felt like there was a moment where, for me, I created a pavilion. I created a temple. So it was really creating a little shrine for this extraordinary effort. So it was, for me, not about making a product, as making a place and embodying the sort of effort of these generations into a sort of something that really, I think, is a miniature piece of architecture, if I could say that.
Yeah, it's funny actually. I'm naturally impulsive, and I know we're all desperate to see and then to taste. But there's something about Stephen and Ewan's presence and the history of what we've gone through. It just makes me slow down a bit. So we'll just wait one more question before we actually see what you've revealed. But I'm curious, as a whiskey drinker, David, how much taste actually impacted on what you produced? I mean, taste is a very specific thing and a very complex and nuanced thing. Did you have an idea about what you want to do and the taste altered it, or did you go on a journey starting with taste?
I didn't get the taste immediately, but it came, and it. I mean, you're probably. I don't know if have you tasted it yet?
No, it's coming up.
It's quite a thing, and I think that the energy of what this incredible cask has produced for us, for me, aligned. I mean, I sensed in a way that there must be some incredible potency that was going to come from this thing. That's why there was so much energy at Gordon MacPhail's for the product. But actually tasting it aligned. So they sort of came together rather than sort of folding from each other.
Well, let's reveal the temple. I don't know who's the high priest on this, but you're going to reveal.
It's a triptych.
I think it probably is actually. Yeah. Anyway, let's have this moment of revelation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
This is wonderful, because we never ask architects just to walk through their own buildings alone. Wow, wow.
I could also take it out if you wanted.
I think it would be great, yeah.
It's a very special object.
I mean, we can see the backdrop on both sides as to what you're referencing may be.
So let me show you this thing, so you can sort of see this. Shall I say a little bit about it?
Please do.
Yeah. So in a way, the bottle is a sort of its own type of cask. It's an inert cask of crystal that freezes this liquid, as it were, as a kind of extraordinary thing for you to see. And it has these cuts which are to help you hold it because it's heavy. It is something where you're supposed to take time. There's a reference to the oak from which the liquid has come from, which is at this area, which is darkened. A sort of reference to the interiority of this magic liquid. And then there's a sort of, we used a sort of bronze metal, but there's a metal cap that's been sort of finally sort of used to seal the top, and it really refers to the clasps that sort of hold the cask. So really, it's a sort of a layering of the very thing that Gordon MacPhail's have perfected and perfect as now a container and a structure. So sort of an adicular structure, sort of an object in its frame. So something that can really be just something you look at, because I think if you're lucky enough to get one of these, you'll want to, it's almost like a work. But also it's almost like, it's almost like an object, a decorative object that you can have in the space and enjoy.
It's brilliant seeing you hold it, because there's obviously a sensory aspect to holding something that has not seen the light of day for a long time, yeah. and then oak, obviously the temple, but also the light getting through. Oak's very specific. I mean, Ewan's talked about it, he's going to talk about it in a minute, but how is that as a material for you to work with?
So oak also in architecture is one of the classical timbers, and it's a very special timber because it has all these properties that give it such resilience, tannic qualities. It darkens from the kind of oils that are in it, but it has a resilience in it, and it ages very beautifully. And if you've had a chance to be in an oak cabin or a sort of a building made of oak, it leaves an extraordinary impression. So for me, it was completely a perfect material to sort of use for the pavilion. And then sort of metals that really either are oxidized or natural to be part of the way in which you open this. We worked with an incredible company to just make that stay up like that. I know it just looked like it was happening. It is an extraordinary feat of joinery. And there were so many prototypes. But it works perfectly now. And there's a kind of wonderful click as it sort of gets into place. That's a real pleasure for those of you who like objects and things that work really well.
I mean, we can see the backdrop, both the here and there.
Exactly.
So there's obviously a reference to the forest and the light and the shadow. And
if the spirit is the stag in the forest, this is, the sunlight through the forest, the chance encounter on this magical creature, a moment frozen. Those are the things that were really deeply.
And it'll never actually look. I mean, it will always change because of light, which is interesting. Which I suppose as the spirit, as the liquid does.
Exactly.
Architecture is a slowish process.
Very.
Yeah. How quick or slow was this for you? The realization of the idea. How did that play out?
Ironically, because of the world we live in, this is literally taken the same time.
As a building.
As a building. This is not fast at all. In a way, very pleasurable to have had the time to really absolutely craft the product. So we were able to, I think, because we had time, really perfect it. There are these bronze cylinders that sit underneath, and the balancing of those and the pins I mean, we just had time to really just enjoy it so much that it totally feels like it's seamless. And that's what you want from something that you're doing, for it to just feel like it just all makes sense.
There's a certain timelessness to it, too. Just finally, the decanter itself. I mean, decanters are, I mean, they're varied. I suppose there is a stereotypical form. I don't think they always lend themselves to hands-on.
No.
We're watching you there. You were sort of clutching this like a child or a creature.
Yeah. Well, if you can get your hands on it, you will want to catch it. It was that sense that I really wanted. I think that this is a very tactile experience, and also one, I wanted it to also have a kind of a sense of care, that you were holding something that was precious. And so that, you know, it wasn't, I didn't want to use all the codes that you normally have, because usually when you have things that you've known before, you kind of go into an automatic, you know, you sort of assume, oh, I pick it up this way and I do this and I do this. And I wanted you to discover it, to see it, to feel its weight, to slow down, to understand the actions. And each of these is deliberately set up to slow you down and to really allow that final moment of pouring the liquid into your glass to be very pleasurable, and to then actually prepare your taste buds for that moment.
So you're a choreographer.
I'm a complete choreographer.
How we pour. You mentioned actually how much precision was needed just to make that stand up.
Yeah.
And it's a real feather in your company's cap. We'd expect no less that you work with a world-class creative individual and practice. But craftsmanship and the realization of this is also important. And David has already alluded to the fact that, you know, you need to work with great fabricators, and architecture requires great contractors, builders, craftsmen and women. Who did you choose to realize the temple and the decanter?
It was always going to be really important. I think we were coming to it from a different lens. I think if we were creating something for one of our other products, you kind of looked at it from a much more functional sort of perspective. So I think when we are appointing our suppliers, our sort of partners for the decanter and the box, we needed to really understand that they had the expertise and the skills because it was going to be challenging for them. It wasn't going to be coming from a standard whiskey ask. There was going to be a different aspect to it as well. So for the decanter, we've appointed Glencairn Crystal, who are based in East Kilbride in Scotland. Glencairn are the sort of foremost premium decanter producers, but also they focus on the decoration as well, because hand blowing a decanter is one thing, but actually then decorating it with the closure, the seal, etc. is really important. The seal is really important in a decanter, because you don't want to get that bit wrong. And so for the box, the pavilion, we went with Wardour Workshops down in Dorset. And again, I think that understanding that this was going to be very complex, going to need a huge amount of engineering, because oak is a natural product, and this product will be around the world in different temperatures and humidities. So again, they need to understand that this is something, and I really like what you're saying about it's a temple and a shrine, but it is still to protect and keep this product for maybe another 80 years for someone who will be looking at it as a piece of art. So it provides both functions, for it to be enjoyed, but also something to protect it and hold it safe. And both Glencairn and Wardour needed to understand that.
Lovely. Keep intruders out, people who shouldn't be drinking it too early. Oak is so important, but there's a kind of a lovely coming together of the 80 years and oak. Explain what it is, and hand on heart, was this planned?
Of course it was.
Good.
Of course it was. No, just as our 50th anniversary is commemorated with gold, and 80th anniversary is oak. You know, so again, I think it did crop up during our initial discussions, and I think that artistry in oak all fed from this 80 years and celebrating in oak was definitely pleasing and not overly planned from the outset.
But something that was beautifully, poetically in sync.
A nice piece of serendipity.
Indeed. We've got a film, another film, Artistry in Oak. Let's have a look at that.
I'm a quiet fan of whiskey, single malts. So when it came into the studio, I think everybody in the studio were like, oh no, he's not going to do it. And I was like, no, that's really, really interesting. One, because of course, knowing about what Gordon MacPhail stood for, it wasn't just a kind of whiskey brand, it was a connoisseur of a kind of craft that is multi-generational, and that was very attractive to me. And that the request was to make not just a sort of, ongoing thing, but a very special vintage. And that was very special to me too. The whole story of this making of this magical elixir called whiskey is about, the forests and the spirit animal of what whiskey is. And this idea of craft, making this incredible piece of technology called a barrel, which stores and it sort of creates an aroma, an incredible power with the liquid that's stored in it. And there's something just so beautiful about this organic form that was really inspiring. And I wanted to make sure that what I was doing really took inspiration from that and really understood this idea of the spirit of the liquid and this incredible part of nature that really informs what this whole thing is.
Oak is the predominantly used timber in this country and for most of Northern Europe. It's an inherent part of British craftsmanship. It's full of character and it takes specific skill to use it as well. It's not particularly easy wood to use, but it lasts forever and it has this huge enduring quality about it that means that it will last forever.
I hope this project really just brings incredible pleasure to those who are going to be fortunate enough to have this in their possession. I hope it just gives them enormous pleasure and joy.
Play. Yeah, pleasure, joy and patience. Stephen Rankin, you're the fourth generation, as I said earlier, of the family. And generations, G&M Generations is, as you said, the pinnacle of the brand. Just unravel a little what the generations aspect is of whiskey maturation.
Well, Tim, so the name Generations for this product came about because every single generation, the 4 generations that have worked since 1895 at Gordon MacPhail, has a hand in nurturing this. And it signifies the skills that have gone into producing this by all those who have worked with Gordon MacPhail over that period of time. Now, Generations has signified the longest and stood for the longest matured single malts created. And it goes back to when we first created the first release, which was back in 2010, and it was the Generations 70-year-old, the first ever 70-year-old, and it was from Malt Distillery. It was followed up in 2011 by another 70-year-old from Glenlivet Distillery, and the year after its sister came out. And then back in 2015, we chose to release a 75-year-old under the Generations, and it had come from the Malt Distillery. And until this very moment, that had stood as the oldest whiskey in the world, and the oldest in the Generations range, certainly. So it felt like, again, the beautiful title for the whiskey that really brought to life that custodianship that Ewan talks about. And as I say, across 4 generations of a family, but all the colleagues that have worked with us. So
clearly there'll be more generations in the family. What I love is it isn't just this linear idea that, you're going to make it even older and even older and even older, although that may happen, but the whiskey will determine that, won't it, as you taste it. But the idea that you replenish, so there is now stock that is 20 years old, 30 years old, so the generations are constantly replenishing.
Yeah, absolutely. just like how a forest regenerates, you know, and the acorns fall and new trees grow. And that's what we're doing. You know, John and George laid down this whiskey with the full knowledge that they weren't going to be around to see some of their casks reach full maturity. And likewise, today, cousin Stuart, you know, with the oversight of, you know, members of the family and colleagues in the business, are laying down casks that we know we will never see come to fruition. So future generations will benefit. So that legacy piece
is very important, and from a whole range of different distilleries, so different tastes, different degrees of maturation. I love the idea that it's an unknown. I mean, you know, without pointing the finger at certain parts of drink industries, you know, that the notion of consistency and the thing tastes the same every year, it's anathema to what we're talking about here. This has an organic and historic aspect to it too. Cask 340, Ewan, how many decanters will be available from it?
We created 250 decanters. The number one decanter will be auctioned in Hong Kong at the start of October, and the remainder will be available through our global network of distributors and also at our shop up in Elgin.
Sorry to be vulgar, but have you set the price yet?
We have set the price, but it's not our intention to release the price until after the auction.
Have you got the reserve price for the auction, Johnny?
Yes, so we have auction estimates that we're able to tell you today. So the reserve price, of course, will stay under wraps, but the estimates will be in Hong Kong dollars, 800,000 to 1.5 million Hong Kong dollars, which is roughly equal to about 80 to 160,000 GBP, or about 100,000 USD to 200,000 USD. And we think that something with this much history and, you know, being the first 80-year-old, we do think this has the ability to exceed that potential.
Yeah, one would hope. We'll just talk to you a little bit more about the auction in a minute, but there is a really important sustainable aspect to this whole venture, this whole launch, and with a charitable aspect to it too. Just explain, Ewan, who the charity partner is and how that came about.
Absolutely. I think it feeds on from this generation approach, this always sort of facing forward and looking to the future. We recognise that this was an opportunity to have a slightly wider legacy as well. So we're working with a local Scottish charity called Trees for Life, whose aim is to rewild the Caledonian forest. So every year they grow 100,000 trees from seed. And all the proceeds from the auction will go to fund this nursery. Many of those trees are oak trees, but also Trees for Life grow many rare species indigenous to Scotland. And that sort of scarcity and rarity, again, just really resonates with this project.
Absolutely. So let's have our final film, Creating Future Legacies, that explores this further.
Legacies is an important part of why we all do what we do, because we all want to contribute to this craft and this art form. And for me, legacy is about, you know, your peers acknowledging that you have done your bit, and you have contributed to this body of knowledge. So it's a really critical thing, and that, you know, that is something that I think drives the professional desire to always be experimenting, to thinking about how to kind of make things better or how to find new ways of doing things.
It's the nature of our product. We fill whiskey into a cask, which we may not bottle for 10, 20, 50 years. So almost every time you fill a cask, you're leaving a legacy for someone in a future generation. But I think that's a sign of what we do, because we recognise and we're able to take whiskies which have been filled for us, and that's the legacy given to us. It's just really important also we leave a legacy for other people as well. Trees for Life are a really important legacy partner for Gordon MacPhail. Sense of community is so important to us. It also symbolises the link between whiskey and wood. Not just the fact it's oak, but also the fact that the whiskey industry, it takes many years for a product to come to fruition. Very much in the same way as in forestry. You plant an acorn and you have to wait decades for that tree to grow. So there's something very nice about that balance, and we're delighted to be partnering with Trees for Life for this project.
extra funding makes a huge difference to the nursery in particular. As well as all the production work on the nursery, we need to be able to fund these trips out to collect parent material. So that can be the trips out to the mountains with people with specialised rope access, or it can be trips out to survey for aspen flowering in the spring. So all of that work off the nursery is extra to what we can do every day, is so important for the future of that habitat.
So my grandfather had one great saying, and that was, the future is shaped by what you do today. It's something that I've embraced in my life. This relationship with Trees for Life will leave a legacy for future generations.
Okay, we're nearly there for the tasting, but actually just briefly, Ewan, why Sotheby's? You could have done this in a whole range of different ways. Why launch it at Sotheby's and with Sotheby's?
I think when we were looking for our partner to launch the oldest whisky in the world, there was a certain synergy between our two companies, long histories in terms of what we do. I think the knowledge and expertise here at Sotheby's, and not just in sort of fine wines and spirits, but also in unique and rare pieces of art, really make them the perfect partner for this launch.
Absolutely. Johnny, you mentioned the date, but reiterate it. When is the auction?
So this is going to take place in Hong Kong, in Sotheby's in Hong Kong, on the 7th of October. And you'll be able to bid there in the room if you're in Hong Kong. If not, you'll be able to bid online in advance of the auction. We'll have about a 2-week bidding window ahead of that auction date.
And what do you get? What are you actually bidding on? I mean, I know we're bidding on the #1 decanter, but what else will be in the lot?
So yeah, the #1 decanter obviously is the leading player. So you'll get the decanter, this wooden box, and sorry, that I undersold it a bit there. It's
pavilion or temple. Pavilion or temple, I think that's what we call it.
Yeah. You get the decanter, wooden presentation case, and it comes with 2 glass tumblers, beautiful glass tumblers as well. So on top of that, you also get some of Sir David's lithograph sketches of the original designs of the decanter and the wooden, beautiful wooden box. And you also get a framed cask head from the 1940 cask in which this was matured. And on top of that, there is an experience as well. So Stephen over here will put on a bespoke tasting for the lucky winning bidder of this lot.
You're brilliant at Sotheby's. I'd be very surprised if it doesn't smash through that reserve and go beyond. But what do I know as a rank amateur? People will also get a chance to see it in different parts of the world. Where can they see it?
Right, so it's going to be on display here in London, in New Bond Street. It'll be out on display in our galleries, so if you're perusing the art and design and jewellery, etc., it'll be amongst all of our goods that we sell here. You'll also be able to see it in our galleries in New York on the Upper East Side, and it will be available to view at the Convention Centre in Hong Kong as part of the broader Sotheby's display there. And so if you can't visit any of those locations, obviously you can see it at sotheby's.com online as part of the sale page, and you're welcome to bid through that link as well.
Johnny, so much of what you sell at Sotheby's in wine and spirits is kind of mouth-watering but frustrating because you can't actually taste it when you visit. You either have to buy it and taste it or not. That isn't the case with this. We can now actually, those of us in the room here, can taste liquid history. So, Stephen, over to you.
Yes, the moment we've been waiting for. I'm sorry you've had to wait 80 years, but thanks for bearing with us. So, those of you at home, those of you who are joining us around the world, this is the moment that we'd like you to open your boxes. So, the people in the room are getting the boxes handed out. Now, when you do so, let me quickly just take you through this. If you almost all got them, what I'd like you to do is slowly remove the lid, okay? It's been beautifully put together, so there's a lot of tight fits in the box. So just take your time. There's no rush. Okay? And you'll be greeted by this beautiful letter welcoming you to this sampling experience. You will also you'll notice that inside the box is a wonderful brochure telling you all about this great whiskey, but also about Sir David's designs of his fantastic pavilion and decanter. Of course, you're going to need something to drink it out of. And our friends at Glencairn have created this wonderful Glencairn blender's glass specifically for this moment, okay, with the 80 on it. So take your time, take it out. You'll find that it's probably a bit tight in the box, so those of you who are wrestling with it at home, just take your time. So I want you to set it down, and I want you to then remove the frame from the box as well. Because underneath the frame, there's a little flap you lift up. And you'll notice a little acorn. Now this acorn has been handmade by Wardorf Studios workshops down in Dorset, and it's actually been made from the staves that have cradled the oak for 80 years. Cradled the spirit, rather, for 80 years. And of course, what does an acorn symbolize? Well, it symbolizes legacy that we've been talking about, and it symbolizes forward thinking. So please, I would like you to just keep this. This is a little memento for the day to have on you, and to be hopefully some inspiration in the future. Now, on the tables here, there are water glasses, there's some water, and there is also a pipette. Okay, so you'll notice there's small jugs. Those of you at home, please make sure you've got some water. I would maybe encourage you all, before we actually get into the whiskey, is just to take a moment to rinse your palate. And just prepare for the tasting of this and nosing of this wonderful whiskey. And we'll always taste our whiskies before we do any adding of water, because whiskey is a very personal thing. You may choose that you do not wish to add any water. And as we're about to experience, this whiskey does have incredible balance. But you'll notice you've got these wonderful crafted pipettes, and there's a hole. All you do is pop it into the water, just a small amount, put your thumb over the hole and take it out. And then all you do is very gently rotate it so your thumb begins to come off the hole, and you can literally put drops into your whiskey. So take your time. And as I say, you may not even wish to add any water at all. So it's such an enormous pleasure to be here with you all. It's standing in the moment of history, isn't it? A history that's sort of come about through previous generations, previous colleagues, honing their skills and tending and caring for this amazing cask. And the cask was sent up to Glenlivet Distillery, which was, of course, formally founded back in 1824 in the northeast of Scotland. It was a cask provided by my grandfather's great friend, Alexander Williams, of Williams and Humbert, who were based down in Jerez, down in Spain. We have an old adage at Gordon and MacPhail: the wood makes the whiskey. Now, with the help of Williams and Humbert, we've traced this cask not just back to what it was used for before it came to Scotland, but right back to the moment it was harvested, back when Queen Victoria was a newlywed, when Tsar Nicholas I was Emperor of Russia, while a gent called Daojong was the 7th Emperor of the Great Qing dynasty, and one Abraham Lincoln was a young, humble, practicing lawyer in Springfield, Illinois. How the world's changed. And I said to David last night, did you think, as you were growing up and even coming through architecture, that you'd be standing releasing the oldest whiskey in the world? And of course he said no. Likewise, did Abraham Lincoln think he would ever be the president? So fascinating how the world changes. Now, the oak was American oak, and it came from the US to Spain, where it was dried and coopered by the expert coopers down in Jerez. It was to go on to initially hold something called mosto. Mosto is pressed grape juice. After that, it was to hold something the Spanish call sobretables. So it's a newly made fermented wine on the table, so a table wine. And then it was to obviously get the first part of its real calling, and that was mature Oloroso sherry. Now, that Oloroso sherry in this wonderfully made butt, 500-litre oak butt, was to then be transported all the way to the northeast of Scotland, where we decanted the precious Oloroso sherry, bottled it, and sold it as Williams and Humbert's wonderful sherry. And then the cask set aside to then be sent by John and George to the distillery. So for over 8 decades, it was then tended. And I would like you to pour the whiskey into your lovely glass. I liked what David was talking about in terms of creating this sensory element to do with the pavilion and the decanter. And the wonderful lenses that he created in the side of them, you know, lenses that for me were a real metaphor for looking not just forward in life, but back as well over the decades that have passed. And it's what art does, isn't it? It inspires you, it stimulates you. And I felt that so incredibly with the design. So the first thing we're going to do is look through this glass and just take note of the colour. Now you'll see it's got a lovely darkness, richness, but it's got wonderful dark golden notes, ambers, flashes of almost like a polished rosewood. As you gently manipulate it around the glass, just pause, and you'll see the lovely bead that's left around the rim, around the glass, and very, very slowly do you see the bead beginning to form, and then elegant little pendants run down the side, the legs. For 80 years, this liquid has evolved and developed, bringing out the goodness from the oak to help flavour this whiskey. And with it, some of these wonderful wood spices and flavours from the sherry. Now, the alcoholic strength of this whiskey is 44.9%. So a lovely robust strength, which, when we come to nose it, helps really elevate it. The quality of the oak and the cask is what is so important to this. The thicker staves has meant that we've had a reduced amount of angel's share, which has kept a lot of liquid over the years in the cask, meaning that it's been able to evolve at a very gentle pace. Now, don't just take my word for these tasting notes, okay? Because we've had Charles MacLean, of course, contribute to this as well, the famous whiskey writer. But whiskey, as I said, is very individual. So I would love you guys all around the world who's watching this to please just take your time and nose it. It's got the most wonderful, sweet perfume to it. It's very fragrant. It's complex, but extremely mellow. Any heat you get is almost like fresh ginger almost. Sweet cherries, a little bit of a waxy polish, a little bit of dried figs. But there's something that exists in this whiskey that is true to Glenlivet as its style, and that's wonderful sort of orange zest, orange oils in this case. Some might pick it up as more sort of a lemon zest, but it's so true to it, and this is so alive, it's so vibrant. This is 80 years old, and it's fresh. It's got life to it. We don't have the time today, but if you do ever get the chance to do this again, just take your time over this. As you nose it over a period, you'll notice that more and more layers of flavour and aroma come forward. It keeps evolving. We go back to the glass again, and there's a little trace of smoke. Of course, back in 1940, the way they made this bit at the distillery was with doing their malting of the barley themselves on site. So a little bit of smokiness would come in. The stills would have been direct fired. So you would have created a different character of spirit as the heat drove the spirit through the stills. Something a little bit more complex, a little bit heavier, a little bit more oily. And it's that robust spirit that's, again, helped this last 80 years. When it comes to tasting, it's something you do with such intrepidation. But please do taste it and feel it in your mouth. It coats the mouth beautifully. Hold it. Those flavors. Again, there's a light warmth from the spice from the oak, but there's also a dark chocolate going on. But it's dark chocolate ganache. It's got a creaminess. The fruit's still very, very prominent as well. And that freshness is still there. Now the finish, those lovely aftertastes, a little bit of cigar box, but there's also something else. And when you go back to the glass, you'll notice it. A little bit of mint, maybe eucalyptus, tea tree oil, but a freshness that's been lying there waiting to be discovered. Some dates, a newly opened box of medjool dates, sticky, some pear, and also on the palate, a touch of licorice. Now, I've had the joy of tasting this on a couple of occasions, and some people were telling me they were getting blackcurrant notes and things. And you can see that it's all part of the same flavor groups. So absolutely beautiful. Even a little bit of pencil shavings, a little bit of oak. Just lovely, but totally in balance. This is one that defies the logic. This does not tell you it's been sitting in oak for 80 years. This is still alive. This is fresh. But please, don't just take my words for it, because Charlie McLean was to include his tasting notes, and he was to I'll leave you with this. He said, "This is truly one of the finest whiskies I have ever encountered." And I hope you all agree as well. So, thank you very much.
So there we have it, liquid history in its uniquely designed decanter in its perfectly designed pavilion. Can I thank David Adjaye, Johnny Fowle, Stephen Rankin and Ewan McIntosh. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for joining us online. Let's just let this taste now swill around our mouths quietly and contemplatively. But that's the end of the launch. Your whiskey is now out there in the world. And as let's drink a toast with and to the 80-year-old Gordon MacPhail 80-year generations whiskey, as they say in Scotland. Ewan and Stephen?
Slangevar. Slangevar.
Slangevar. Thank you.
我们的4位家长、大家长们，也要再一次感谢媒体今天在线上跟我们参与这一个很独特的一个线上发表及品酒会。首先呢，我再次介绍一下现场的4位长官，我们的大家长、董事长 Mike Cunningham 柯廷汉柯董事长，还有我们的执行长 Stephen Parker， 我们的副总经理 May。还有行销总监 Matty， 好，再次感谢各位媒体朋友们今天来到我们Gordon MacPhail 高登麦克菲尔这个独特的一个品酒会。我们希望在不久的将来，可以在现场可以跟大家亲自来见面，也希望大家今天晚上有一个愉快的夜晚。谢谢大家，谢谢。Great job.